Hello everyone, and welcome back to another 3DS retrospective, a series where I'm going to be taking a look back at some fondly and sometimes not so fondly remembered games for the 3DS. In today's video, I'm going to be looking back at Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. This is a game that, for me, kind of falls into that not so fondly remembered category. So I went back and played this game for the first time from start to finish since it came out back in 2013, and I'm honestly really happy to say that my opinion on it has changed quite a bit. I used to be super negative about this game. I used to really just compare it to the original Luigi's Mansion, which is my favorite game of all time, and I used to kind of treat it as this lackluster sequel, but nowadays, looking back on it, it's 10 years old at this point. I wanted to give it another shot, and I wanted to play through it again, treating it as its own thing and not comparing it to the original Luigi's Mansion, which is my favorite game of all time. And because it's really hard for sequels to live up to our expectations, especially when it's a sequel to something that you hold very near and dear to your heart. So before we get into the game itself, let's have a little story time. So as I mentioned previously, the original Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube is what I consider to be my favorite game of all time. It was a very, very special game to me. It was one of the first Nintendo games that I ever owned and played. I have a whole video about that. It's kind of old, so, watch it if you feel like it, but it kind of gets the story across. It's called Why I Love Luigi's Mansion. It's like the third or fourth video I ever made on this channel, so go check that out if you're interested to hear that story. But first, let's go back to June of 2011, that famous E3 conference that I talked about in the Animal Crossing New Leaf video. Nintendo had this amazing conference with this really cool 3D stage set up, and it was just like this really awesome sizzle reel of all the big 3DS games that were coming out in like the next 2 years pretty much. The stage is going, they show Mario 3D Land, they show Mario Kart, I believe they showed Star Fox 3D, and all of a sudden the lights go dark, you hear like a crash of thunder, and then you hear Luigi kind of scream, and right away I was just like, oh my god, it's Luigi's Mansion. I don't know if it's gonna be a remake or what it's gonna be, but I just knew in that moment, I was like, Luigi's Mansion is back. And back then, this blew me away because the original Luigi's Mansion came out in, I believe it was 2001. It was a launch title for the GameCube, and it was just one of the first video games that I got really into, and because of that, it means a lot to me. And at that point in time, 2011, it had been 10 years, and I didn't really ever expect there to be a sequel to Luigi's Mansion. It had been 10 years since the original came out, and I thought Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube was just this one-and-done experimental game that Nintendo made to kind of show off the GameCube's hardware and stuff. And I was okay with that. I never really, of course I wanted a sequel, but I never really thought too hard about it. So when this trailer was shown off, my mind was going crazy. I was so excited, and I just could not wait to get my hands on this game. I just had it so built up in my mind that this was going to be the best game ever. It was a follow-up to my favorite game, and like, how could they go wrong with this, right? So fast forward to 2013, the game comes out, and I remember it came out on a Sunday, which I feel like Nintendo used to release their big games on Sundays all the time back in the 3DS era. At least a lot of the time they did. Nowadays, I feel like they usually go for the Friday releases, which makes more sense. You go into the weekend and have the whole weekend to play the game that is coming out, but they released this game on a Sunday, and I'll never forget, usually on Sundays we would go visit my grandpa, and so we were going to do that Sunday, and I was like, hey Dad, we need to stop at GameStop because I have this game pre-ordered. It's Luigi's Mansion 2, I don't know if that means anything to you, but I have this game pre-ordered, it's at the store, I already paid for it, can we just stop by, I'll run in and pick it up, and that would just make me really happy, can we please do that? And he was like, oh yeah, whatever, and we stopped there, and I went in and got the game, and I just remember staring at the box, and I just was like, it's finally here, I cannot believe it. And at this time, I didn't have a 3DS XL or anything, I was playing on the original tiny little 3DS, the very first model. I paid $250 for it, and then it got a price drop like 6 months later, which I was kind of sad about that. But I was playing it on that tiny little original 3DS in the car. There's just this horrible glare on the screen. My dad was playing music in the car. I was like not able to focus on the game. I was having trouble seeing the game, and I was just like, oh man, I just wish I was at home right now playing this in my dark bedroom. But I was like, you know what, I can't wait. I just need to keep playing. And then, we're visiting with my grandpa, and we're having a nice time, but then, I sneak off and go into, like, the guest bedroom, and I'm just laying there playing this game, and it just wasn't the right setting to be experiencing a game that you were really excited for the first time. I should have just been spending time with my family, but, when you're a little, 14-year-old, and a game you're really excited for just came out, you can't really expect much self-control. So that was my experience with the game originally. I got through like the first 2 missions, then I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna wait till I get home to play more of this. And then after that, I played through the game, and I was having a good time, but I was noticing things with the game that were starting to bother me. I didn't really like the new ghost designs. I didn't like the fact that there were no portrait ghosts, and I felt like the game was going for a much more like silly, kind of childish Saturday morning cartoon kind of vibe, kind of like Scooby-Doo or something. No hate on Scooby-Doo or anything, but the original Luigi's Mansion was always this kind of dark, kind of weird, like the graphics were kind of realistic, and it was really like kind of a moody, dark, creepy game, but very subtle with its creepiness, because it was still for kids, but also like it kind of felt like this weird kind of slightly mature game in the Mario universe. But then Luigi's Mansion 2 was like, the ghosts had these like kind of like minion personalities, and they were always like trying to be silly and pulling jokes on each other and stuff. And I was just kind of like, this isn't really matching that same vibe that the first game had. And at the time, that made me really not like the game as much, because I was comparing it too much to the original, which, as expected, because it was the sequel, it was Luigi's Mansion 2, but, this game had a different developer. It was developed by Next Level Games, who was a Western studio. I think they're based in Canada. And, the original Luigi's Mansion was developed in-house by Nintendo, and you could tell that it wasn't the same people working on this game. Even though, I believe Miyamoto supervised both of them, it was a completely different aesthetic and vibe, and just the tone of the game was really different compared to the original Luigi's Mansion. So after I finished the game for the first time, I kind of walked away from it just being like, that wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I never touched it again after that, and I always kind of looked back at this game in a negative way. But now that I've finally played it again in 2023, I have to say, my opinion on this game has changed a decent amount. I do finally see this game for what it is, and when you're just looking at it as a standalone experience and not comparing it to what I would have liked a Luigi's Mansion 2 to be, it is a really good game on its own, and I do really like it. Like, nowadays, I would probably put this in my top 10 3DS games of all time, easily. So, let's move on to the positive things, because I've kind of been droning on about what I used to not like about this game. So, the big positives about Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon are the fact that there are now 5 mansions instead of 1, and essentially what this does, it gives you this really great level variety, and it also literally triples the length of the original game. The original Luigi's Mansion, if you know what you're doing, you can beat it in like 3 or 4 hours. But this game, even if you do know what you're doing, because EGAD's constantly calling you and telling you what to do, so it's pretty hard to not know what you're supposed to be doing. You have 5 mansions to explore now. And this game, playing it again in 2023, not having played it for 10 years, it took me almost 12 hours to complete, which is pretty good. And when I say complete, I just mean beat the game. I didn't bother 100%ing it or anything like that. So just playing through the game casually and just going through it without trying to 100% it, it took me about 12 hours. And I think that's a perfect length for a Luigi's Mansion game. Another great thing about this game is the amount of puzzles and kind of interactivity with the environment, with the mansions themselves, is cranked up to 11, and part of that is thanks to some of Luigi's new abilities, like the way that the new flashlight works, where you have to hold down the A button to charge it up, and when you release it, it lets out this big bright flash, which is used to activate these little lights that you'll see all over the place, which gets you lots of treasure, and it is also how you stun ghosts in this game. And I think that the combat in this game actually kind of feels the best in the series, kind of. I'm always going to love the first game's combat, but comparing it to Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, there's a bit more to think about when you're battling ghosts in Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. And part of that is the way you stun ghosts with the new flashlight, and also this new feature where as you're kind of sucking a ghost with the poltergust, you have this little meter that charges up, and then when it's full, you press A and you get like a big powerful suck, for lack of a better word, that really, if you time it correctly, when the ghost has like lower HP, you'll get more money kind of thing. And I really like that. It adds just kind of something more to think about when you're battling ghosts, and it's a way to get more money. And then one thing is that money is actually used for something in this game. As you collect it throughout the game, you'll unlock upgrades for your poltergust, and also the other new thing that Luigi has, which is the dark light, which lets you kind of scan the environment for invisible items. And this is another way that you interact with the environment in terms of puzzles, and this is also how you find booze in this game. And I actually really like these new features that they added. It really does add a lot more variety to the gameplay. And after playing this one, it is kind of weird going back to the original and these things not being there. Another thing about this game is the boss fights. Now, this is another thing that kind of bothers me. I kind of briefly mentioned it, but there are no longer portrait ghosts in this game. These are the ghosts that were like kind of human-looking characters that were all over the first Luigi's Mansion. They did away with them in Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, and then they brought them back in Luigi's Mansion 3, which I was really happy about. But in this game, yeah, that was a lot of people's biggest complaint about this game, myself included, because the portrait ghosts were this cool thing. You know, you'd go into a room, it'd kind of be themed around what their personality was like. You solve a puzzle to fight them, and it just brought more character to the game, and that doesn't exist in Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, unfortunately. But that's not to say that this game completely lacks personality, because Luigi himself is full of more personality than ever, which you will see throughout the game's many cutscenes, and honestly, these are all really great. But back to the bosses, you'll have many bosses throughout the missions, which are just kind of like the normal generic ghost. You'll see this guy with the big brain a few times, and those are fine. But then at the end of each mansion, you'll have like the main area boss. You're usually fighting like an object, and then this ghost that possesses the object will come out of it. And it's kind of a cool idea, but some of the boss fights kind of stink, specifically the boss fight of the snow area, which I mentioned earlier, which is just this really annoying shooting mission where you have to break all the ice off of this big ice monster's face, and it can get really difficult, and the thing you're shooting, the cannon you're shooting out of, like, can overheat if you take too long. And even though it's not really that hard, it just takes a long time. Like, if your cannon overheats right at the end, you have to start the whole thing over, and it's very unforgiving. And I remember hating this the first time I played the game, and coming back to it 10 years later, this boss fight was literally the only one that took me multiple tries again, and it was just really annoying. So there's that. I don't really love the boss fights in this game, but then at the same time, some of them are kind of cool. There's this one at the end of the game where you're fighting like a giant knight, and it's like it's super easy, but it was kind of cool at the same time. So what I guess I'm trying to say about Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is that even though there are still tons of things that I really prefer about the original Luigi's Mansion, what Dark Moon lacks in terms of stuff like not having portrait ghosts and not having that same vibe as the original, it does make up for in a lot of other ways, like its level variety and willingness to be kind of out there with its boss fights and try these really unique things, even though, in my opinion, they don't work as well as the original game. But I still respect Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon for trying a lot of new things. And I really do appreciate it now for what it is, even though the original Luigi's Mansion will always be my favorite. You know, nothing will ever change that. I've just kind of accepted that at this point. But yeah, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon does have a lot to love about it. And honestly, I do see online that it is kind of an unpopular opinion to not like this game. So I'm happy that I've come around on it, because I feel like if I made a video just hating on Luigi's Mansion 2, and I never actually gave it another chance, I feel like I just look like an idiot, because that would be a stupid thing to do. So like, of course I had to play it again, and I'm just so happy that I can now be like, yeah, I like Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. It's not my favorite in the series, that'll always go to the first one, but I do really appreciate it now. So anyways guys, thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, thank you. And let me know in the comments, what do you think about the Luigi's Mansion series? What do you think about Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon? Do you prefer the original? Do you prefer 3? Or is this one your favorite? Let me know, because I'm always curious to hear what other people have to say about this kind of stuff. So anyways, guys, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.